My mom would always send my brother and I off to school every day. We could walk to the school, and she would stand by the front door and say, "Study hard. You might be a professor someday," right? And my brother did indeed become a professor in like brain science, so wildlife ecology.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce himself. Roger, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Maurice, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Great work that you're doing. Great conversation. So delighted and honored to be with you today and in perpetuity, as long as these things last.
No, and
out there in cyberspace.
Have you?
Right?
Yeah. Long time. We before we started recording, we realized we haven't seen each other for a long time. So
yeah.
Good to see you. Yeah.
Precisely, and kind of getting together on, in the past, and when we first got to know each other through the anti-hunger campaigns, anti-poverty issues, refugees, migration, actions in Africa, and so. Thanks for having me, and I was a reporter with the Wall Street Journal for 30 years. And 20 of those years as a foreign correspondent, based mainly in Europe and then also in Africa, South Africa. And so I'm a journalist and an author. After 30 years at the Wall Street Journal, I figured it was a nice round number, and had moved back to the States after all that time overseas. Was based in the Chicago bureau of the Wall Street Journal, had done a book with Scott Kilman, a colleague of mine at the Wall Street Journal. He was the journal's main leading wonderful agriculture writer for many years, probably about the same number of years that I was overseas. And we had done some stories together. And so when I came back and was in the Chicago bureau, eventually we said, let's put all that we know together, if we can, into a book. It was the first book that either of us was doing. It was kind of that idea coming to us in, say, 2007, 2008, when there was kind of the beginnings of this global food crisis. Back then, if you remember. So increasing shortages of food from a number of reasons. So surpluses were dwindling, surpluses of some of the major grains and crops that, we had over the world. This long period of kind of stable food prices seemed to be coming to an end, because with the shortages and the supply chain issues, then prices started to rise. There was food riots in dozens of countries back then, if you remember. Some governments fell because of it. And all of a sudden, people in power, who weren't paying attention to the food situation or the hunger situation in the world. All of a sudden, we're like, hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? And so Scott and I had been writing about this for a long time for the Wall Street Journal. So we continued to write at that time for the journal on these issues. And we said, let's try to put everything that we know into a book. And so that was the book that we came out, Enough: Why the World's Poor, Starve in an Age of Plenty. And it was basically about how we brought hunger with us into the 21st century. The shame of it, the awfulness of it, absurdity, that we continued to bring this medieval suffering, hunger, malnutrition, starvation with us into the 21st century. What's wrong with us? Despite all the progress of the previous decades, the advance in scientific capabilities, in telecommunications, you could be in touch with anybody, kind of simultaneously as we are now, kind of starting, back then. And it was like, how awful, how absurd that we have brought this, again, medieval suffering with us into the 21st century. I had been with the journal overseas. One of the stories that I had been covering before coming back to the States and then being in the Chicago Bureau was the Ethiopian famine of 2003. 14 million people were on the verge of starvation, being kept alive if they were going to survive at all by international food aid that was rushing into the country, being distributed by the World Food Program and kind of all the wonderful agencies and NGOs and humanitarian groups that would then be distributing the food aid. It was the first great hunger crisis, first famine of the 21st century. 3 years into this new millennium of ours, and it was like, yeah, what madness grips us that this continues to abide and persist. So it was kind of in the back of my mind. Scott and I had done some stories together at that time, kind of looking at the global picture of it. Trying to take a new look at hunger, starvation in Africa and kind of elsewhere in the world and what was driving this. And then as the global food crisis and as things got worse, then with, as I said, the surpluses, the supply chain, the prices, riots in dozens of worlds, what's going on? So did that book. And I really liked the process of writing books. So neither Scott or I had, as I said, had written a book back then. And we kind of looked at each other and said, geez, well, who's going to read this? Is there any audience there for it? We were used to, so the Wall Street Journal at the time had I think a daily circulation back then in 2007, 2008. Book comes out in 2009 of maybe, 2 million circulation a day. And then they figured, with readership, it might be because a lot of the copies of the Wall Street Journal would go into offices. So it's maybe 5 million people a day can, read stories. So we're like, okay, yeah, not that all those people would read one of our particular stories in the paper, but would kind of have that exposure. Gee, how many people are going to read a book on this? We eventually figured that, look, even if only one person would read the book and decide to do something about it, right? A college student who changes his major or her major to do something, someone in the humanitarian field that then becomes, more encouraged or emboldened or inspired by it would be great. Somebody who's never thought about these issues at all of a sudden, realizing and awakening to this issue in the world. So even if it impacts just one person, that would be, worthy enough and worthwhile enough to have written the book. So our expectation, that way we were able to also modestly keep our expectations. We're both from the Midwest, and yeah, so it's okay, we'll keep our expectations humble and modest. I really like the process of writing the book, the kind of long form journalism, the ability to spend time with people, to go back from maybe stories that we had done at the Wall Street Journal that I had done, and to go back to those people and those communities. And I think it's one thing that, as journalists, we don't do particularly well on or often enough, is going back. We were in a place at one stage to write about something that was going on. So in this case, say the communities and the people and the farmers so impacted by this famine, by the drought, by kind of the economic and market screw-ups that had led to that great hunger crisis in 2003 in Ethiopia, to go back and say, so what progress has been made? What is the impact of that? What's the legacy of that? Because the true long-lasting legacy of any hunger crisis, it's horrible that anybody kind of dies and suffers because of that. But gee, the long-lasting effect on those who survive, particularly the children, hopefully they do, they're carrying that with them far into the future, from the malnutrition and the stunting. So to go back and do that, so I really like that aspect of being able to do that with books. So that was one of the main reasons then for leaving the journal. As I said, it was 30 years, so a nice round number. After all this time at the journal, figuring my journalism kind of evolving in that way to kind of this longer form storytelling nature of it. So then left the Wall Street Journal, joined the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, had known about them since we were back in Chicago, and was talking to them while writing the first book, because they were doing kind of their own research and getting into the whole aspect of American leadership, revitalizing American leadership in ending hunger, particularly through agriculture development. And then I was talking to them and said, hey, thinking about, wanting to just focus on writing books. And they said, if you ever leave the Wall Street Journal, let us know. We'll try to create a position here. Great thing is they had people who are skilled in fundraising and grant writing, which I'd never done. Again, a Lutheran from the Midwest, you don't ask people for money. You don't ask how much money they have, right? So it's like, I can't do that, but other people do. They study that in school, so hooray for that. And then that led me on to this next phase from, still a journalist, nonfiction, writing nonfiction books, and then continue to then write about hunger and malnutrition in the 21st century. That kind of became my driving passion. And to do kind of growing out of what I had seen in Ethiopia. And that then had led to the next two books against the last hunger season on forced
right?
and forced smallholder farmers in Western Kenya and their lives as smallholder farmers and why they're important to us. And kind of as they plunge into this time of the year known as the hunger season. And then kind of how they come out of that, or how through agriculture development and their efforts can all be supported and strengthened to kind of banish them the hunger from their lives. And then the book following up on that, then the first 1,000 days on the importance of good nutrition for moms and children during that crucial period from the time the mom becomes pregnant to the second birthday of her child, and the importance of not just food but nutritious food, emphasis on nutrition in that period. There I followed moms and their children in various parts of the world, 4 parts of the world: India, Uganda, Guatemala, and Chicago. And that all those books, each one kind of grows out of the other. And I called those 3 books, the first 3 books, the Real Hunger Games trilogy. Not the dystopian Hunger Games, the fictional dystopian world, competition for scarce resources. But this is, the Hunger Games, the hunger situation in our midst, and hunger and malnutrition in our midst, right? And then I figured, okay, 3 books, trilogy, that's kind of a nice round thing too, but there was still more in me. So that's this most recent book, Against the Grain: How Farmers Around the Globe Are Transforming Agriculture to Nourish the World and Heal the Planet. So that just came out in August.
Yeah. And I all books are fascinating and important. I do have a couple of questions around Against the Grain, though, because it's the latest one, and you just told me also that you're working on a new one, right? But before we go there, I always am fascinated, like, how did somebody end up? How did you become a journalist? Is that a result of your upbringing? Of your caretakers, your parents, brothers and sisters? Can you tell a little bit about that? So, are you originally from you're from the Midwest? That's what you were.
From yes.
And so, did you grow up there? Were you born? Tell a bit about that.
Right. So I'm from Northern Illinois, Crystal Lake, McHenry County, kind of up towards the Wisconsin border. Went to Lutheran grade school. So I think that has had a big positive influence on me, kind of in my thinking and my approach to things. So I frequently kind of think back to, if not specifics. The principal was a brilliant kind of math teacher. He could just do math equations. You could put 2 sets of numbers, 2 sets of 6 numbers in a multiplication. This number this 6 number line times this 6 number line. He could just look at it, and within a couple of seconds, he'd be writing down the answer, right? We'd all still be kind of, that was before we were using calculators or anything. So we were still doing kind of the multiplication by hand. So that I remember, but then kind of also the Lutheran aspects of it. And then went then to the University of Iowa.
Why did you?
Well, to study journalism. So so I was always kind of even, I started, I was always interested in like newspapers. So we had newspapers in our house, and my parents would watch the news, And yeah, were, kind of children of the Depression.
Mhm.
Uh, Neither of them even had like a high school education. My mom grew up on a farm in Northern Illinois. My dad was, he was in World War II, part of, I think, four invasions, North Africa, Sicily, Italy, liberation of Rome, and then came back and was, working as in factories. So a stalwart blue collar worker, very much part of the greatest generation, fighting for our democracy and then coming home and helping to build it and do things as best he could. So great examples. And they really believed in education, even though they didn't have much formal education themselves. My mom would always send my brother and I off to school every day. We could walk to the school, and she would stand by the front door and say, "Study hard. You might be a professor someday," right? And my brother did indeed become a professor in like brain science, so wildlife ecology, brain sciences. So and so he was in, and then eventually he was doing research and working in Africa. So he kind of paved the way for me then to go to Africa. But I had always liked newspapers, the aspect of telling stories, of talking to people about news and things. I worked for the Crystal Lake Herald, which was a 3 times a week newspaper, my hometown paper, in high school. Like probably starting as a sophomore, maybe, was the editor of the high school newspaper, the Orange and Black. Those were our colors, and knew that I wanted to study journalism in college. And University of Iowa, great legacy of writing with the famous Iowa Writers Workshop. Wasn't part of that, but a great journalism school, and particularly a great student newspaper, the Daily Iowan. It was also the morning paper of Iowa City. So really, mainly run by students, but had a professional staff that was doing the advertising and the sales and circulation things. Had kind of an independent board. And so it was kind of the greatest preparation for a career in journalism. A great start to it. And so, so that kind of took me to the University of Iowa, and then had an internship with the Wall Street Journal in the Atlanta bureau while still at Iowa. And back then, the Wall Street Journal was hiring its interns because we were cheap and malleable, hiring people out of college. And so, I finished up the internship, went back, had another semester to finish because I had worked so much with at the Daily Iowan. I was in the newsroom a lot. So a couple of semesters, I was actually like a part-time student based on the credit hours and things. So I needed another semester. I was on a 4.5-year plan to get my BA, and then informally, and then then they hired managing editor, called and said, "Hey, would you like to come work with us full time?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." He says, "We got an opening in Dallas bureau." So went down there. That then begins my long 30-year career then with the Wall Street Journal. And then kind of after being in the Texas bureaus, Dallas, and we opened a bureau in Houston. The Wall Street Journal, there was an opening in the bureau in Bonn in West Germany, still West Germany at the time. And I raised my hand for that. Don't really know what the motivation for that, except, again, curiosity. German on both sides of my family, through Abstammung and heritage. And so then again, managing editor calls and says, "Hey, off to Germany. Do you have a passport?" Or West Germany. "Do you have a passport?" "I do not." "Your first assignment as a foreign correspondent is to get a passport." So I was the most unlikely foreign correspondent. I had no ambition to do that. But it was like something that came up and said, "Oh, that would be neat. Yeah, I'll raise my hand for that." And then all of a sudden it was like, "Oh, yeah, Roger, we'll dispatch you there." Thus then begins this, kind of total of 20 years of being a foreign correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. And so kind of that's how that all
Yeah.
evolved. And yeah, from Crystal Lake, Illinois, interest in newspapers, writing. And then I don't know what I would have been otherwise, maybe an accountant. That would have been a different life. Maybe a pastor, I don't know. And so, but anyway, this. And then eventually, I mean, we probably have talked about this also sometime in the past that, as started writing about then hunger with the Wall Street Journal, particularly when based in South Africa, and in writing about humanitarian and development issues that, while based in Zurich in Switzerland, wasn't writing about, the economy or banks or anything, but it was a good place to be based to write about humanitarian and development issues because of all the UN activities in Geneva. And Zurich had a great airport and airline at the time, Swiss Air, you could fly anywhere. Seems like such a long time ago. They had such problems coming out of COVID after 9/11, and so many flights were grounded and things. And so, but yeah, it was but anyway, based in Switzerland, writing about humanitarian and development issues. That's when I went down to Ethiopia. First time in Ethiopia for the famine in 2003. And I remember very clearly my first day there in Addis Ababa, the capital, was meeting with the World Food Program to talk about the extent of the famine, their relief efforts, their distribution efforts. I would be traveling with them in subsequent days to see some of the hot spots and, kind of what was going on and dynamics of it. And it was somebody at the World Food Program staff that, they were on a kind of conference table in their Addis office, and they had rolled out maps of Ethiopia and all of Africa because the famine and the hunger crisis was all down the east coast of Africa and to southern Africa. And he said to me, Roger, looking into the eyes of someone dying of hunger becomes a disease of the soul. Because what you see is that nobody's had to die of hunger, particularly not now, right? In 2003, this grand new millennium of ours, this new century. Why? So, and I thought, disease of the soul. What's he talking about? What do I take for that, right? So I'm on my malaria tablets. You're guarding against cholera or an outbreak of meningitis because Ethiopia is part of the meningitis belt at certain times of the year. And so, what do I do about disease of the soul? And so then within the next day or two, traveling with them to some emergency feeding operations, and went into a emergency feeding tent, and they were like full of like dozens and dozens of children on the verge of starvation. Kind of an awful scene. Their parents were with them. One, maybe both. They were in very poor shape themselves because of the hunger crisis and the famine. And yes, it was there when I did look into the eyes of the hungry for the first time. I was kind of ashamed of myself because I'd been writing about things in Africa and about humanitarian development issues for a while, but had never, it was kind of parts of stories. So, background things, or kind of how it factored into kind of social issues or economic issues, but had never really focused on like the human side of it, and never like looked into the eyes of the hungry. But there I was in that emergency feeding tent, and that did then become this disease of my soul that it changes you as a person, as a human, and then certainly as a journalist. So that then became the passion of my journalism from that point on, writing about hunger, malnutrition, the awfulness, the absurdity that we had brought that with us into this new millennium. What's wrong with us? And that then has propelled me then, to do all these things. And, people would say, even the book publishers, maybe your next book, maybe you'll write about something that will be more saleable, more profitable. And I said, no, this is what I want to keep writing. I got another idea for it, right? And so, which brings us to the current writing, and that I'm still doing this. So kind of in essence became almost a one-note journalist. This is my passion. This is why we're so almost in kind of a calling, in a sense. And I think all my years of journalism, so even going back to the Crystal Lake Herald, right, and the Orange and Black in high school, and then the Daily Iowan, and then all my time at the Wall Street Journal, all that time as a journalist, I think led me to this story and this point, and becoming a foreign correspondent without even having a passport. I think about all that, and it's like, gee, kind of how did all that take place that then led me to this point that this is the passion of my journalism. So this disease, so it's my disease soul that brought me to you to begin with a number of years ago, and back to you today. So.
So Roger, when I'm listening to you, then that moment where you realized this disease of the soul, where you experienced that, was that in a way a turning point then because you mentioned, if I would not have gone into journalism, maybe I would have become a pastor. So that particular moment, did you turn from a journalist into a writing pastor?
Yeah, in a sense, if you look at it that way, I think, yeah. So I think, and as it is for many of us that are, kind of in the humanitarian field, particularly on the hunger issue, Matthew 25:35. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty, drink. I was a stranger and you took me in prison and you visited me. Kind of however that goes. I think it's perhaps one of the most lyrical passages of the Bible. The way one gets into heaven, that whole what precedes it, the separation of the sheep from the goats, and what you do to the least of these, my brethren, you do unto me. And if you don't do these things, you're not doing it to me. And so I think it's kind of been that, in a sense, of that whole kind of calling nature. And so I figured, yeah, that's what my journalism, and that's why I think the books then were then a natural outgrowth of that, because in the books you can take a point of view, you can have an opinion. I think readers expect that, right? And so even in the Wall Street Journal, it'd be like, oh, what's this guy writing about this for? What's he trying to tell us? But the journalistic standards, Wall Street Journal top notch. Kind of looking at all sides of the story, being as object as possible. Although we all bring our own subjectivities as journalists to a story, our backgrounds, as we were just talking about, where you come from, kind of what have you experienced in your life. You bring all that to the stories, and you can't just turn that off or shut it aside. So we all have some subjectiveness. But then in the books, you can, perhaps have more of a judgment, because I think that then is what readers are also expecting. What is this author trying to tell us? What do they want us to take out of this, right? Whereas in journalism, it might be newspaper stories. It's like, okay, here's the stories. Reader, do with it, act as you will, right? As opposed to, the editorial side of the papers would say, do this, right? This is right, this is wrong. But no, on the news side, it's like, here's the situation. And so, so with the books then being able to, be more, to go back and visit people, to spend time with them, this long form journalism, but then also to have more of an opinion. And so right after the first book came out, Enough, as we'd kind of go around promoting that book, would sometimes be introduced as a journalist and advocate, right? And I'm like, oh, that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Are journalists advocates? Should we be advocates as a journalist? So I was still at the Wall Street Journal again when the book came out, and maybe 6 months afterwards, then is when I was leaving the journal, because I had these other book ideas to do, and then joined the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And then I figured, no, I mean, in essence, that's what journalists are. I mean, maybe not, just by the selection of stories that we write about. We write things hoping that people read and then do something about it. Or if you're a TV journalist, somebody watches this news broadcast, a documentary, and it kind of inspires them, outrages them, prompts them into some kind of hopefully positive action, or worthwhile action on something. And so, yeah, kind of, isn't that what also storytelling is? It's kind of an activism. So to be an activist, to be an advocate, as well as a journalist, and as long as I'm advocating for the end of hunger and malnutrition, I figure that's a worthy thing, and who's going to dispute that, right? Oh, shame on you for being an activist to end hunger and malnutrition, right? It's like, are you for it, right? I hope not. And so yeah, so I got over that fairly quickly, that it was like, yeah, is that comfortable? Journalist and activist, journalist and advocate. And then it was like, yeah. So in that sense, yeah, then kind of becoming a journalist who has something to say.
Mm-hmm. When I look at the last three, four books, I see also I noticed the kind of you also evolving as a partly as a researcher, as an observer, as an activist as well. Tell me if I'm wrong. So I initially see that you're focused on the smallholder farmers and their role.
Mm-hmm.
Then you talk about the importance to focus on children and the mothers through your 1,000 Days book,
Right.
Because only increasing yield will not address hunger, all the aspects of hunger, especially
Right.
not of the nutrition part. And then the last book, you talk about sustainable agriculture practices,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there I see a switch from not only paying attention to humans, but also to the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a correct observation? And can you talk us a little bit through that?
Yeah, very much so. And thank you. And so, great observation, and kind of an evolutionary form. So first of my journalism, from like newspaper journalism, then to book writing. And then with the books, that, as I said, kind of one leading to the other. So with Enough, Why the World's Poor Starve in an Age of Plenty, it's so many aspects of agriculture, particularly smallholder farmers, particularly the nutritional aspect of agriculture, where you're growing food, yes, calories, but hopefully it benefits the farmers, right, in the first place, as it should, so they can continue farming. But also, what about the consumers, right? Shouldn't the food be as nutritious as possible for them? And so it was then, who was, bearing the brunt of this neglect the most. And then we were writing about, again, how we brought hunger with us into the 21st century, and kind of through this negligence. It was the smallholder farmers, and had, yeah, spent many days, while with the Wall Street Journal, and writing stories in Africa, and spending time with journalists, with farmers and agricultural issues. Again, not until 2003, then in the famine, kind of really focusing on the human aspects, and the looking into the eyes of the people starving of hunger and suffering so much. So that was then, for the next book, then the second book, that was why, okay, I have to leave the Wall Street Journal to do this, to spend time with these smallholder farmers, and to explain why they're so important for all of us, and why that the more that they succeed as smallholder farmers to end their hunger seasons, which is the time between when the food from your previous harvest runs out because you've consumed it as a family, you've sold some for school fees, for kids, for medicine, for clothes, for, to improve your little house, maybe after the rains come and kind of, pour through the mud, pound through the thatched roof, or the mud brick walls. And then until the next harvest comes in. And so that time, then the hunger season. And it was like, yeah, how can that still exist? in this day and age. And so then to spend time with them. One of those four families, three of them, the women were the main farmers. And that ratio is, pretty much what one sees in those countries, that it's the women who do at least a subsistence agriculture and growing the food that the family needs, and the men might then be involved in, cattle or livestock or something, or kind of off farm work where they could get it. And Sephora, the mom and the farmer, they were the poorest of them. Their hunger season at the time that I was following them stretched on for 8 months, 9 months, if even longer. They were already in the midst of their hunger season when I started following them. She said something really profound. I want to say again, the wisdom of these of the farmers around the world. She said, being a mother or a father, being a parent of a hungry child, unable to stop the crying of a hungry child, is the deepest form of misery, say during the hunger season. And she felt that she was failing on two fronts. One, as a farmer, because she wasn't growing enough food to feed her family through the course of the year. And two, as a mother, because her children were malnourished, right? Which is a horrible burden for a parent, and particularly a mother and a mom who's doing the farming, to bear. Her youngest in the family, David, was like 2 or 3 years old in the course of the year of following them back and forth over time. Was manifestly malnourished with distended belly and mottled hair, kind of had a constant cough. So that had me thinking, what happens to these children that have malnutrition, disruption in their food supply, who endure this hunger season? What happens to them as they grow up? What legacy do they continue with that? So I finished that book, and here then starts coming up this 1,000 Days movement. This consortium of so many NGOs and humanitarian organizations that were part of that. Your work was part of that. The church groups around the world essential to that, and Bread for the World. And, it was like, okay, that's how I can explore what happened to David and the significance of this. And so that's why, the first 1,000 days, the critical importance of nutrition for moms and children and the world, and how that impacts all of us. And then, that again, spending so much time with farmers and smallholder farmers in India, Uganda, Guatemala, not so much in Chicago, but they were dependent on the farmers, and, the prices and the Board of Trade, which is in Chicago, and how all that settles into, and, they were on SNAP and WIC programs. So kind of, again, this hunger in the midst of kind of the richness of this country. And it was through that then seeing, and thinking back on kind of the farmers and how they were telling me that the changes in climate were impacting them, the other environmental threats. And that then reminded me of, that first trip in Ethiopia in 2003, and traveling with the World Food Program. There were two cataclysms that were going on at that time. One, the humanitarian. 14 million people had to be fed by international food aid, who were on the verge of starvation in that drought and famine. And at the same time, an environmental catastrophe, because so much of the land was degraded and unable to sustain farming families. The World Food Program, and you could see that kind of the erosion, the deep gullies, these very eerie, kind of sand and soil formations that had come from the wind and the rain, and like a moonscape that you can imagine. And the World Food Program then, and other humanitarian agencies in the midst of that famine and the food relief, were then coming to the thought that, we are going to have to be providing food assistance to these families forever because the land that they're on is no longer productive and it's so depleted. That is when the WFP, and I had it in my notes, I still have those notebooks from those conversations. We're talking about, what they could do. So this great world's largest humanitarian agency, the World Food Program, as they call themselves, having also become this environmental and conservation agency. What can they do to assist and support efforts by the government, by the farmers, by the counties, to rehabilitate their land, so to establish this regenerative agriculture? And so as I was then, after the first 1,000 days, and so now we're in the midst of COVID, or that's coming up, and so I'm starting to report against the grain. Went back to Ethiopia, to that area where we had been with the World Food Program. So this was 2019, 16 years earlier. What had happened to these areas where this humanitarian catastrophe was? So to go back and revisit those communities and children and see what this legacy is that was written about in the first 1,000 days. But then also, on the conservation and environmental issues, efforts, what happened there? And there then saw that these moonscapes were now fertile and the farmers were back growing. They had basically had to leave their land lie fallow and just move off the land or stop farming there, let it regenerate, do some, terracing of the land to protect, stop the erosion and the water runoff, some planting of some grasses and bushes and some trees. And their farms were now back and almost more and as productive, if not more productive than they ever had been. So that was an eye-opening thing. And I said, okay, that then becomes this effort for the next book. How all this is related, right? It's the one of the big ways of then alleviating hunger and malnutrition is then by taking care of the planet and the natural resources that are the natural allies of farmers. And they were lying in severely wounded because of the decades of modern industrial agriculture and the monocropping and the chemical fertilizers and pesticides and kind of all the annual crops that you're plowing around every year, and the carbon is being released and things. And you could see this kind of biplane, what I was then hearing from these farmers. So after Ethiopia, and then, so that's at the end of 2019, and then COVID happened. So I'm not traveling anywhere to continue the reporting for then a couple of years. And then so we're able to travel again after COVID, and it's like, okay, back on the road to continue with other farmers. In the meantime, I'm figuring out or trying to think of all this. And it's what these farmers in Ethiopia were saying. And then as I found out, kind of farmers in all these other places that I went to, they were all seeing that their farming, their agriculture was turning against itself. The more that they farmed with these more modern practices, agriculture practices, the less they were able to actually harvest because of the impacts on the soil, on the land, on the water availability, on the cleanliness of the water, on their biodiversity, on the collapsing pollinator colonies and disappearing their rains were ever more mercurial, the temperatures ever hotter, and they know that, right? Because they're there all the time. They know their climate, they know their environment, they can see the changes over time, and it's like, we're doing this to ourselves, right? How do we change? So that's then the subtitle then, how farmers around the globe are transforming agriculture to nourish the world and heal the planet. And so then I was figuring, kind of in my time of thinking about this, and then going back and resuming the reporting globally, it was these farmers are kind of at the middle of this looming, impending great collision in the world that we're facing. That's already happening. And that's the collision of our two supreme imperatives as humans, humanity's two supreme imperatives. One, nourish us all, right? Mm-hmm. An ever-growing population, an ever more prosperous population. Hooray for that, that more people are moving out of the depths of extreme poverty. But that places a greater strain and demand on the global food chain. So how do we continue to nourish ourselves in the future while at the same time preserving, protecting, saving the planet from the very actions of nourishing us, so that the actions of agriculture and the toll that they take on on the planet. And nature, which is then, as I said, the allies, the natural allies of farming, the soils, the water, the climate, the biodiversity, all that goes hand in hand with farming. And the farmers were realizing, oh, gee, what we're doing is basically harming this, and we're harming our ability to feed ourselves, to nourish ourselves and our families. So that then how gets into that book. And so that's a great question that you have. So that evolution then from writing about kind of people and the human impact of hunger and malnutrition, and then also including keeping that always as a component of what I'm writing and reporting, but then also the environmental parts of it as well. That's so much a part of that. So again, that then becomes a great task of agriculture, I think, going forward. How do we both nourish the world and heal the planet for the very actions of nourishing us at the same time?
No, thanks for that, Roger. And I really would like to encourage listeners to check out your books, because I really think you described it well. Show also ultimately how everything is interconnected. Mm-hmm. Just as a quick sidestep, because for those listeners who are not aware, if we're talking about 1,000 days, you're referring to as you explained, the time that a mother gets pregnant until the child hits his second year. And that is irreversible. So if a child doesn't get, and including the mother, the right food, that child will never reach its full potential. So then that has, of course, huge not implications only for the child, but also ultimately for a whole country. If that happens across a whole generation and more.
Because that early childhood, that early childhood malnutrition then leads to stunting, both physically and cognitively, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of in the reporting of that, you see kind of the true implications of that malnutrition, particularly in the early childhood, the malnutrition of the mothers. So of then, maybe then giving birth to low weight babies, their lack of nourishment and the nutrients during breastfeeding that they're able then pass on to the child. Then the solid foods and the complementary feeding, that if that that's not lacking in nutrition and even in substance and calories for the child, but primarily the nutrients, that leads to this stunting, and it kind of impacts the immune system going forward, and that stunting then becomes a life sentence of underachievement and underperformance for these children. So what I found then going back to Ethiopia, then for this book, Against the Grain, had been back also during the 1,000 days and then seeing this, is that the one boy, the father and son, he was about maybe 5 years old, was on the doorstep of starvation, cradled between the legs of his father, who was also very, skeletal, in this emergency feeding camp in Ethiopia in 2003. Going back and visiting them over the years, maybe at times with a 4 or 5 year interval. Then back in 2019, was back in that area to see then the environmental consequences and that catastrophe, but then also the humanitarian and human side. So revisited them. Hargirso, the boy, was now about 20 years old, 21. He was in the 4th grade, just learning simple math. In that 4th grade classroom of like 60 plus children, more than half were 18 years old and above. So older teenagers, young adults. They were from that cohort that was so impacted by the malnutrition, by the hunger crisis, by the famine in 2003. They carried that impact all the way. So there you would see stunted bodies, stunted minds, but then also stunted ambitions. Because like you go into any classroom and it's like particularly 4th grade classrooms, what's everybody want to be someday? And a girl in the back stands up and says, I want to be a nurse someday. Oh, that's great. Well, how old are you? I'm 18. The boy stands up, I want to be a doctor, right? Help people. How old are you? I'm 18. Another boy, I want to be an engineer and build things. Oh, that's great. How old are you? I'm 15. if they're only basically in the equivalent of the fourth grade in the Ethiopian system, still learning simple math, Hargirso still struggling with reading, even in Amharic, their language, and in their local language, you know, are they going to be able to achieve any of these ambitions? Probably not, right? They should be in, at the end of high school or starting college by that time or thinking about it, right? So what have we lost, right? So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what might all these children who are stunted, malnourished in early childhood and stunted, and they figure it's like still, the people who calculate these things globally, so the World Bank, World Food Program, World Health Organization, that's still about one in every 4.5 children under, so 23% or so, children under 5 years old in our world today are stunted in some manner. What? Basically a quarter of all children, and as I found, and then by going back to these, stunted children become stunted adults. This is a lifelong thing, this life sentence of underachievement and underperformance. So we have to ask ourselves, what might these children have accomplished for all of us were they not malnourished and stunted in early childhood? And this lost chance of greatness for any of them. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse. I want to be an engineer. I want to be a teacher, right? I want to be a business person. All those stunted ambitions, then we lose all that, right? What might they have contributed to all of us? And so were they not malnourished and stunted? So this lost chance of greatness for any one child in the world becomes a lost chance of greatness for us all. So that then leads me to also think, and then as part of that book, The 1,000 Days, hopefully that readers take away, that a malnourished child anywhere in the world is then a lost child everywhere, because the impacts of that nutrition ripple from the individual to the family, to the community, to their country, to all of us, because again, that great unknown, what might they have accomplished for all of us had they not had this severe childhood malnutrition and stunting? So yeah, you're right. So that's the impact of that.
Yeah. No.
Thanks for reminding me. I should have said all that before. So.
No. And I really thanks for writing all those books and really encourage people to read, to buy them, to read them, and spread this knowledge is important, and do something about it. Now, I have a couple of questions that I would like to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to go to the fourth gear, actually, though. It's to have your answers going fast in terms of Twitter answers or, a short elevator.
Yeah, see, I talk too much, right?
No.
It was like my long form.
But there are just because of everything that is happening now in the world. I just want to have some quick reactions from you, and then I have also some questions that I always ask when I walk 100 miles. As you know, this is a spin-off of my 100 miles.
Excellent, right? Mm-hmm.
Okay, my first question then is to you, Roger. Is you have seen a lot. You have seen the impact of programs that have made a dent, more than a dent, into all those situations that you've described, and some have been implemented by local organizations, others by international, and others by USAID, and then collaborations. What do you think is going on now with those freezes that are going on in terms of the aid? Yeah, any quick reactions there?
Yeah, terrible disruptions. You think of like the programs and the benefits that they did, and yeah, I mean, there's kind of problems with any program organization that can always be improved and made better. But so many aspects of these various things that I was writing about and kind of seeing in my reporting, USAID on the ground, the shaking hands of their logo from the American people on the bags of the food aid. This is embedded in their minds, these recipients of this, and they take that with them also throughout life. So it's like, gee, the damage that I think that is being done and kind of the future by not having these programs. Hopefully they're reinstated in some sense, and can kind of get back with this great work that this country should be doing and leading the way on these issues. The other thing that strikes me is, are we losing compassion? Kind of what's wrong with us? Where's the groundswell of people standing up and saying, hey, this is a good thing that America does, right? It expands America's, impact and greatness in a sense, right? Of all this work that has been, being done on kind of the soft power, the soft diplomacy of things, of this handshake, this compassion. And so that's kind of, something I'm thinking about, was what's happened to our compassion.
I try to mention the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to all my guests, because I really think it's not a perfect framework, but it is at least, a result
Right.
of a global discussions that we had in trying to make our world more sustainable. And you also, in your books are describing the things that are necessary to make our world more just and sustainable. My question, and again, a quick answer, please, is what do you want the listeners to know about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals?
I think they're great markers to set for goals and ambitions. This is what needs to happen. I'm kind of have always been focused then on goal 2, zero hunger. Zero hunger by 2030. I know so many people. Reese, probably we've talked about this before. Why 2030? Why not now? We can do it. We know how to do it. Where's the give a damn? In a sense, where's this compassion? Where's this kind of global reckoning that this is horrible? We need to do something about this. It's a weight on our conscience, and it should be. I think there's something they're really great, hopefully to be achieved, but also to make us think about that and to bring awareness to that. These are great things to strive for, and in particularly goal 2, zero hunger.
You were alluding to why not now, but actually we are on average only at 15 to 70% of these goals.
Right.
Now, a growing group of people is saying, one of the reasons that we are not making the programs that we should make is that we did not pay proper attention to the abilities, skills, and knowledge that you need as an individual as well as a community. And as a result of surveys that they did, they came up with 5 inner development goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting.
Right.
2 quick questions around that. One is, have you heard about the inner development goals? And if yes, if not, any quick reactions on the SDGs?
I had heard about them, hadn't really delved into them until you had sent me the link. And I looked at that, and the one that resonates with me is maybe, being self-awareness or something. It's the whole notion of kinship, right? And so in Against the Grain, in the last chapter, it's on the United States farmers in the Midwest and the Great Plains. And particularly then the last part of the last pages of the book then with the Lakota Sioux at the Rosebud community in South Dakota. They are trying to reestablish their indigenous agriculture ways, which had been trampled over the centuries by the actions of the government, and basically trying to eliminate the Native Americans, to steal their land, deposit them in places in the West and inhospitable land, trying to recapture their farming ways, which are kind of the essence of regenerative agriculture. So it's not a phrase that's maybe the phrase is new, but the practices, all these indigenous farmers around the world, they've been practicing this farming and doing their agriculture and their hunting and fishing and their hunting and gathering and crop growing in harmony with nature all the time, right? So the regenerative agriculture and what they talk about is kinship. That regenerative agriculture is not just farming practices, right? Growing food, protecting the environment. Yes, that's all part of it, but it's also relationships and the kinship that we all need to have with each other, with nature, that will then go a long way towards this goal of both nourishing the world and healing the planet. So,
Okay. Relating. Linked with relating is connecting. We are connected. I'm connecting you with the listeners of this podcast. I'm also going to connect you with the previous guest, and the previous guest had a long question for you, but I will summarize it.
How would you want to live your life, or how would you aim to live your life so that when you know it's ending, you have no regrets?
Right. I think, interesting question. And I think that's kind of one of the things that then was propelling me to write this most recent book, Against the Grain, that I wanted to make sure that I also kind of wrote and did the storytelling, again, with these farmers around the world, about the importance of paying attention to climate, the environment. And I felt that that was kind of a missing part of what I had written about in the past. Again, those two great calamities that I saw back in Ethiopia in 2003, humanitarian, had written a lot about that, and that was guiding this disease of the soul and guiding that. But then also, well, what about the environmental calamity and catastrophe? So it was like, that one I needed to get back and do. So I think there's, there are parts of my writing and journalism that are out there that I would, I guess, probably still like to continue to do, and figure that I have more to say about this. I figure that what we can do as journalists and certainly as authors and nonfiction writers is to raise the clamor, right? And I guess that is what I want to do, is if, kind of the last thing that I would do, or if I hadn't raised the clamor sufficiently on these issues, hunger, malnutrition, the environmental, aspects of that, hey, people, pay attention to that, to grab people by their collars as they read this storytelling. If I didn't raise the clamor sufficiently, right, kind of what did I do? If I didn't in essence infect others with this disease of the soul, right? So I think that's kind of something I think about. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
I just want to mention this because I had written it down. You had prompted my mind on songs, right? Kind of in my life or in journalism. Certainly, I think with all the reporting particularly in agriculture and with smallholder farmers, and the Ethiopian famine, U2's Where the Streets Have No Name. Bono has talked about that, maybe not specifically in links to this, but being in kind of all these rural areas, right, where the farmers are. How do you get to their places, right? There's no kind of names or address boxes or addresses on their houses, at least as far as maybe kind of locally, it's this is where all these people live. They'd certainly know who's who and where they are. And so that has always, that where the streets have no name and are people just totally forgotten there. And then from our time living in Vienna and writing about particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of apartheid, which had happened when I was in South Africa, and Mandela's release. I was very gratefully to be able to cover that. Then to be based in Vienna, and at that stage, kind of the Yugoslav conflict was going on, very violent. I was the closest person of the Wall Street Journal, kind of being based in Vienna to that. And there was, kind of the classical music, and particularly, the beautiful Blue Danube Waltz that I'll listen to and close my eyes, and that kind of gives me a serenity.
Your question for the next guest.
I guess my question would be, how are you raising the clamor about what moves you or inspires you? Raising the clamor on these issues that are of importance to you. My mantra as a journalist is to outrage and inspire, So this 1-2 punch, or of the book writing, and Scott and I had talked about that and kind of doing the first book, and then we've carried through with that in these other books. That outrage, not in kind of an outrage that you are, going to lead an insurrection and be destructive, but as John Lewis, the great civil rights leader, make good trouble. A good outrage that motivates you, that prompts you to raise the clamor, to speak up, and to be forceful and relentless about that. So, say particularly on the food and the hunger front, Sustainable Development Goal 2, not moving very far on that, right? That's probably one that lagging on, particularly post-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID. Raising the clamor on that. Why? What are we doing? Why aren't we moving faster? Let's get there. So, yeah. What are you doing? What are you doing to raise the clamor?
No, thanks for that, Roger. The walls that you were referring to, I missed what type of walls was that?
Oh, it's the Blue Danube waltz.
The blue?
Blue Danube, the river.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The Blue Danube waltz by Strauss.
Yeah, got it.
This is very, it's a beautiful tune. It has lasted all this time. I mean, when you look about, things that have been created, particularly in the arts or the cultural sense, the lasting of this music, right? Of some of the writing that, the Dickens, and writing that last over time, or what previous empires, and the writing and arts that came out of there. And it's why, wow, if anything that one does can kind of have that staying power, right? You figure, so the Rolling Stones, so how long in the future are they going to be singing their songs, right? Will be people listening to them as we are 200 whatever years later after the Blue Danube Waltz and the other great, masters of the classical music was written. So.
No, thank you so much, Roger. And just for the listeners to remind them, and I don't know if you are aware, but we made a Spotify playlist with all the songs that have been selected by the guests.
Oh, good.
So a long list now, from classical music to YouTube.
Well, that's why I wanted to mention this, right? So you have other classical music nominations for that? Or good? Okay.
Absolutely. But also reggae, or even heavy metal. It's
right.
I really enjoy listening to the list because it's very, very diverse. But it reminds me, my extreme privilege that I've been so blessed with, having talked with a great number of people from all walks of life. So awesome.
Right.
And I really enjoyed today as well. And it's always good to listen to you and talk with you. Before we close, and I thank you, a question.
There's sun coming on my face. It's a gloriously sunny day here in Alabama. So
it's great. Right?
I needed to close my blinds a little.
So any question that I did not ask you today, but I should have asked you?
I don't think so. I mean, you're very good. Taking me back through kind of motivation and how I got to this point, the evolution of my writing and things. And no, so I don't think so. I mean, that's why you had sent me the questions about the songs, and so that's why I figured, nope, let me mention them because I had thought about that.
Yeah.
And then the inner development and things, and kind of how I got to to where I am, and that this disease of the soul. From what I was originally heard that and was like, oh gee, how do I protect myself against that? No, there is no protection, nor do you want to be protected by it, because if we all had that, the disease of the soul, in some manner, on whatever issue, I think that's a good motivation and propelling forward.
Okay, then actually I do have a last question that I did not send you, and just to when are you expecting that the next book will be ready?
Oh yeah, probably not for another year or two, because I'll probably continue to be reporting on it and writing. And again, it's putting the context of kind of everything in the past, the overseas reporting, domestic reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And again, kind of asking the question, where's to give a damn on this? And as we get closer to the Sustainable Development Goals, why kind of what's impeding progress, and why does all this particularly hunger, malnutrition, continue to abide and persist in our world when there's basically nobody for it, right? I mean, there's some people around the world that will use hunger as a weapon for control or domination, or as a weapon of war and conflict. But no, otherwise, regular people, everybody's against hunger, right? And malnutrition, well, why does it continue to abide and persist? And what's it going to take for us to say, we finally need to end that? So it's kind of a variation on that thing.
Okay. Looking forward to that. And again, listeners, if you did not read Roger's book, check it out.
Thank you.
And some of the books are also on Audible or on digital, so
yes,
it's all out there. So please,
there are ebooks,
please.
And I think against the grain, if it's not already on Audible, it will be, because I know the publisher was talking to me about it, so there will be a listening version.
No, and I mentioned to you, I enjoy walking and then listening to books. So
yeah, exactly. Right. Well,
thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Roger, and
well, thank you. I appreciate it. And continue with the walks, the talks, the listening. Listening, so important, right?
Try to do my best. Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.